Hi, good evening. I'm reaching out tonight to share my story. I am one of the co-founders of Florida Medical Rights Association, along with Debbie Sowden, and her and I met shortly after both of our fathers had died in the same month of November back in 2016. We were both trying to get this law changed called the Florida Free Kill Law, and through social media we connected and became friends and joined forces. And it's probably one of the best things I ever did. Um, so when we started FMRA, Florida Medical Rights Association, we had decided to make it about everyone and not just ourselves. So we had when we removed our previous website, we took down our personal stories and decided to focus on everyone else. But it seems like a lot of people really don't understand the way that this law affects people in our daily lives. And so we decided together that we would video our stories of our fathers and go ahead and put those up. And so that's what I'm here to do tonight. First, I want to share a little bit about the law itself. Florida Free Kill Law is based, we call it that based on the statute 768.21, specifically subsection 8. Subsection 8 states that, that the only way that you can file a lawsuit in the case of medically negligent, gross negligent death is if you are a spouse or a minor child of the one lost. Now note, this is just in the case of medical negligence, and it's only in the state of Florida, and it's not in the case of any other kind of negligence. So it basically excludes anyone that is not married. And they say that this is just for pain and suffering. So the thing is that having it precluded for pain and suffering also means that there's no way possible you could sue for just economic damages. The only economic damages that occur when someone dies is literally the cost of a funeral, which is well under the cost of what it would take to hire an attorney to sue. And mostly attorneys take cases because they want to make money. Not that that's a bad thing. Like anybody else in our jobs, we do things because we like them or because we make money at them, or both. So you can't get an attorney to take a case of wrongful death. And how we hold people accountable in this state and in this country is if they do something wrong, we either file a lawsuit and settle that, or or we threaten to file a lawsuit and settle that, or we actually file a lawsuit and go through a whole court proceedings. I know a lot of people out there say that, Florida is a litigious state, and if they open this up, that there'll be a lot of lawsuits. And to them, I say, why are you punishing the people that are harmed instead of the people that are doing wrong? That's the biggest problem that I have with this law, because, in the case of my father, the nurses that overdosed him medically are still working at that hospital. No one has said to them that they need to be re-educated. Nobody has said that they need to take a class in medication or that the hospital should update their medication system. And that particular hospital, I happen to have an email directly from them, has over 1,300 documented medical errors per month. I'm sorry, I said that wrong, not per month, per 6-month period. Which boils down to around 200 or so medical errors a month that are documented. And they didn't include my father's case. So if we think about that for a minute, the ones that they have to report are the ones that they're reporting. That's over 7 errors a day, 7 medical errors documented. They're bad enough to be documented on a daily basis that do not include those that they don't have to report, which would include Florida free kill victims. And right now, in this country, medical error is the 3rd leading cause of death and largely undocumented. I would have to imagine that it might even be the leading cause of death. So the quality of our care is a big problem. And people do make mistakes, but people, when they make mistakes, need to learn how to correct them. I know I do. It's part of life. And without that, and if a mistake is not pointed out, we continue to make the same mistake unknowingly. It happens all the time. So so that's why we started this group together. And in gosh, it's so hard for me to share this while being filmed, but what happened with in my case, my father's story, I was on an airplane. I was actually going to a conference. I go to conferences and fly quite a bit for work. And my plane was just landing in Atlanta to make a transfer there. And, usually I turn my phone off when I fly, when they say, but in this particular instance, I had forgotten. So the plane was literally like coming in to land on the runway, and my phone rang. And I looked at my phone, and I was just going to turn it off because I was actually embarrassed that my phone had rang when everyone's supposed to have their phone off. And I saw it was my brother. And I thought, well, that's odd for him to be calling me right now. So I answered, and he said, hey, Mel, has mom been sick? And I said, yes. We've been talking and texting the last couple of days. She's been really sick. She hasn't been able to keep anything down for a couple of days. She's had a fever. Why? What's going on? Is everything okay? He said, I don't know. I'm on the way there now, and I think she's dead. She might be dead. And I said, what? And it was like in that moment in time, all time stopped. I didn't see or hear any of the people around me. I just completely fell apart. He said that he had received a call from my father that mom was dying and that her eyes were rolling back in her head and he needed help. And I guess the paramedics were already on the way. And so was my brother. And I said, okay, well, I'll call you right back. Let me call Jeff and let me get him headed in your way. I'm on a plane right now. I can't come. I'm going to get turned around, but let me, you don't need to do this alone. So I called Jeff, and Jeff went over there. And by this time I was still like bawling and crying and calling my brother back and trying to find out what was going on. And I guess a lot of time had passed because I turned around, a woman tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around, and the whole plane was empty. And she said to me, don't worry, the redcoats are coming. And I was like, what? That was so confusing to me, but I was on Delta, and they have a team, I guess, called Redcoats. And the woman's name was Dorothy. And so Dorothy came and led me off the plane, but first she just came and sat down next to me, and she said, hey, I heard your mom died. And I said, yeah, she did. And she said, so you want to go home? And I said, yeah, I do. She said, well, I'm going to get you all turned around and we'll get you there. And she gave me the biggest hug ever, and I just totally fell apart. And so she had this man waiting with a wheelchair at the end of the aisle. And it was a good thing too, because at first I thought, well, that's silly. Why do I need a wheelchair? And then I just kind of collapsed down into it. And I think I was pretty much in a state of shock at that moment in time. And she was really wonderful, and she took care of everything and got me turned around. Well, when she told me what gate to go to, I was on the phone again with my brother and with my boyfriend. We were back and forth, and what was happening was that my dad, he was a handful, and he had kind of lost his mind a little bit. He was a little bipolar. He suffered from a little bit of dementia too, and he was not willing to accept that my mom had died. They were together for about 50 years. I think it was 47. And so he was arguing with the paramedics that they just needed to help him get her back to bed. And help her get some water, and everything was going to be okay. And he wouldn't let them take her body. My brother still has this mental image of her laying on the floor there that he's described to me over and over, because he was trying so hard to coax my dad to let them take her, and he wouldn't. You know, he loved her so much, and we all did. So then the paramedics, after about 2 hours or so, and I'm listening to all this going on in the background. I'm on the phone. They're trying to hand the phone to my dad, and I'm trying to tell him that I'm coming. And I felt so helpless. So back in the airport, you know, I still wasn't hearing or seeing anything going on around me. I was just so focused on what was happening on the phone, and my whole family falling apart. And so they wheeled me into a break room, and it was really lovely. Some of the staff kept coming in and checking on me, and they were taking turns giving me quick hugs and walking out. It was really, really beautiful thing that they did for me. So back to my dad and mom. The paramedics called the police, and the police said, well, you know, tried to also coax him, and there was basically one really nice cop and one really not so nice cop, and the not so nice cop was yelling at him, and you know, my dad basically stood over her body and hit him with a cane and told him, "You're not coming near her." And so he wanted to arrest my dad, and ultimately the decision was made, and Jeff and my brother, my boyfriend and my brother, pleaded with the police to realize that he was in a state of shock and he needed to go to the hospital and not to jail. So they agreed, and they sedated him on site and brought him to the hospital. So let's just be clear that he went into the hospital for, the diagnosis was complicated grief. He did not have a heart problem. He did not have a lung problem. He had some bone and musculature aches and pains that are common at his age. And he had just turned 70. And so other than that, there was really nothing physically wrong with him. You know, he ate healthy, and him and my mom worked out constantly. They went swimming almost every day, and for walks, and walks on the beach, and to the gym. And he was actually a professional bodybuilder back in the day. And this is actually him winning a trophy for Mr. Bahamas over 50 a few years before that. And whoops, I just dropped a tack. And this is them just a few months before all of this occurred. So anyway, by the time I got to the hospital, you know, of course, Dad had been there a few hours. It took me, I don't know, time was such a blur, maybe 4 hours or so to fly home, and then, of course, get to the hospital. And so when I got there, he was laying in the bed, and he saw me come in, and he held his arms up like this, and he said, "Mommy's gone." And he said, I know. And I came closer to the bed, and he started to get up to hug me. His wrists were restrained, and there was a woman, a babysitter, sitting there next to him, because when they took him to the hospital, they had Baker Acted him, and it's required by law that someone under Baker Act has a babysitter. And, you know, we already know he was really kind of out of control and losing his mind. So as soon as he started to sit up like that, another woman came in the room and injected something into his IV, and he went from sitting up to leaning back and sinking in. And I realized she was putting something in his IV, and I looked over and I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm sedating him." I said, why? I mean, why? She goes, he tried to get up. I said, I know. I just got here. I'm his daughter. My mom, his wife just died. Like, of course he's trying to get up. Is that like a crime or something? And she just kind of smirked at me. She went, and then she walked out. Um, so I'm sure that my dad was being impossible with them. He was wanting to leave and he was not happy to be there. I was glad to see that he was digesting the situation from what I had heard on the phone. That was already some improvement in my mind. And so as he was leaning back into the bed and trying to stay awake, he said, "You got to get me out of here. They're going to kill me." And I said, "No, Dad, they're going to take care of you. I'm going to go take care of everything with Mom. It's going to be okay. I'm going to go take care of things with Mom. And we're going to get you out of here." And he says, "No, you got to get me out of here. Get me out of here now." And then he was out. Um, so I really, I didn't believe him. That I believed that he felt that way because he had long had a fear of hospitals. And you know, he always said people die there. He knew about this free kill law. He had explained it to me in years before, and I honestly didn't believe him. So I'm not surprised at all when I tell people about this law that they don't believe me. But it is real. And so I assumed he would be safe there. I talked with a social worker. I was really honestly afraid that if he went home on his own after those 3 days, that he would commit suicide or, you know, something like that, you know, jump off the balcony or something, and that he wouldn't be able to handle being alone for a second. And I was trying to find if there were nurses' aides that could come help, or, you know, if I could find a place for him to go, which I didn't think he'd go, you know, willingly. And I was just trying to figure out what to do with him. But at the same time, I also had to go make burial arrangements for my mother. So, so I felt that I was leaving him in good hands. And I regret that I didn't look through his medical chart at that point. I did not speak to a doctor. I spoke only to the nurse on duty and to the babysitter, and they weren't really forthcoming. And I didn't think anything could happen. He was so freaking healthy, and there was nothing wrong with him. It was just, in my mind, it was just a little bit of sedation. And when he'd lived through it, and, when it was all over, we'd have the funeral and we'd do what we could do together to, make everything work without Mom. So I honestly wasn't at all concerned. At that moment in time, I really felt and believed that hospitals were good places where people took care of people. And I have to say, most of the time that is true. So, I did leave that day, and my brother and I went to go get a grave site for my parents and take care of setting up a viewing and all those other things that come with a funeral. And so the next day, I saw him briefly. He was just sleeping in sedation. And the next day was the day for him to come home, and also the day for the viewing. So I called the nurses the night before, and I said, "How is my dad doing?" And they said, "He's fine, but when he was awake this afternoon, he refused to eat, and he has to eat before he can leave. It's the rules." And I said, "Okay, I will be there in the morning, and I'll bring some food from home. He doesn't trust hospitals. He doesn't trust your food, and I'll just bring some food from home." She said, "Okay." So the viewing was to be at 11 a.m. and it was roughly 9 a.m. We planned on going there, feeding him, seeing about release, and then making it to the viewing. So I'm on the way out the door. I have in my hands a container of homemade chicken soup, and the phone rings, and it's the hospital, and they said, your father just stopped breathing. So my first reaction was shock because there was no reason for that. And then I think I just screamed. I'm not really sure. Again, like for me, emotions lead to little blocks of time missing. And I cried a lot, and we got in the car to go down there and see what was happening. So now I was faced with they were trying to revive him, and I lost them both, and I don't even understand what happened. So I get there, and they have him intubated and in ICU, and I said, "What happened?" And they said he's suffering from a broken heart. Now I get it, right? That's some kind of a diagnosis, right? Um, a broken heart. So why does a healthy man suddenly die of a broken heart? And first of all, let me tell you what, my dad was terrified to die. He was more terrified to die than his heart was broken. And so that's number one. I know him. He was ornery. And I didn't even start to suspect anything because I was still in so much shock at that point in time. I really, we evaluated the situation. He had stopped breathing long enough that he was brain dead. The doctor said that he was brain dead. We knew that his expressed wishes were not to be kept on machines. So we made a decision to turn off the machine. And I watched him take his last breaths and struggle for those. And I sang in his ear and talked to him in his ear very softly for a long time. And so a few days later, we buried them both together, side by side, one funeral, two parents. And that was tough. That was just really, really tough. My whole world really changed that day, because I still wish that I could pick up the phone and call them and just say hi. So I remember the good, I remember the bad, and I remember all the things we learned together and did together, and I just really miss them. I miss them every day. It never leaves my heart. So so after that, and the funeral was done, I started to think, how do you die of a broken heart? It doesn't make any sense. So a few days later, I went to the hospital. I'm thinking, if I say anything, they're going to change medical records. So I'm just not going to say anything. I just went in and asked for a copy of the medical record, brought his death certificate, and went into the Department of Medical Records and asked for a copy. So they give me this copy that's like 7 pages long. And I thank them. Take the envelope, I walk outside, I get in my car, and I think, this seems awfully light. So I open it up, and it's like the intake papers and the death papers, and that's it. No notes, no doctor's notes, nothing. And I'm like, the heck is this? So I go back in, and I ask the girl in medical records, and she says, oh, we just give out a summary. I said, well, what about the rest of it? She says, well, I can get that for you. Is there a reason why you want it? I said, I'm his daughter and I have a right to have it. She said, okay. So I had to wait about an hour, and they gave it to me. It's on a CD. So thankfully, because it's over 200 pages. And as I looked through it, I started to realize that there was a lot of notes about my dad basically being a pain. He was, anytime he was awake, was only for a few minutes at a time. He argued with the babysitter, tried to pull off his restraints, tried to pull out his IV, and then they would medicate him. So I took this file and I brought it to a friend who is a pharmacist, and she's not really retired, but she doesn't really work anymore. She's one of my best friend's moms, and And so I brought her the file and said, what can you tell me? And she took her time with it. She took a couple of weeks and really looked through the whole thing. And she came back to me and said, he was medically overdosed. So I took the same file and I brought it to a very good friend of mine. One of my other best friends happens to be a critical care emergency nurse. And I gave her the file and I said, can you take a look at this, please? This pharmacist, my other friend's mom, says that he was medically overdosed. I want to know what you think. And she looked at the whole file and she pointed out the exact same things that the first one had pointed out, that he was medically overdosed. So he was on 4 sedatives, Haldol, Seroquel, and 2 others. I'd have to pull up the file to look. What basically happened is one nurse coming off shift gave the doses a little late. The next one coming on gave them a little early. I'm sure they were trying to keep him quiet. And ultimately he stopped breathing. And it's right there in black and white. There's really no dispute about that. Of course, I filed complaints with the Department of Health, and I also contacted the hospital. I was really, really angry. And, I wasn't exactly nice about it. Let's say that. I was really, really mad. And, ultimately they killed my dad. And, I had already lost my mom. So I could have at least had my dad, and they took that away from me. I really feel like I was robbed the opportunity of taking care of them in their old age. They went from young to dead. And that's one thing that I always envy when my friends complain about taking care of their parents in their old age and helping them, or they talk about it with love. I do envy that, because I really feel like I missed out on that part of the journey of life. So they really robbed me of that experience. And I was pretty pissed. So I asked for the, for them to look at this, and they blew me off. And when the health department went to investigate, they basically did a report that it was 12 pages long about how mad I was, but there was nothing in there that they had reviewed the medical file. So I was like pretty shocked about that. And that's when I decided that we needed to change this law. I did, of course, talk to some lawyers. I was aware of this law, but I did have to do my due diligence. And since then, I've learned a whole lot about this law. And not only that, the minute I put up this website, people started reaching out and contacting me. They either thought I could help them, or they wanted to share their stories. And so I get a lot of emails and people emailing in their stories. I'm going to take this moment in time to make a request that I'd like to make videos with people, because I think it's really important that society understands, what's happening here. Again, I reiterate, nobody went back and said, hey, you nurses shouldn't have crossed paths like that and overdosed this man. That should never have happened. Nobody reiterated to check an armband. Medication machines are not updated, and this is still happening. So, I do just think that it's really important that we get this law changed. We're in year 3 of trying. The first year was for Debbie and I mostly a learning and a gathering of support and people who this also happened to. And the second year, we were blessed to have Representative Marcato filed an amendment attached to a medical malpractice bill to repeal this law, and it did not pass. It went before the Civil Justice Committee. And now we're in the 3rd year, and there is a bill. It also, it has to go through the Civil Justice Committee, the Banking and Insurance Committee, and the Judiciary Committee. Bob Rommel has let us know that he's not going to let it pass, and he is the chair of the Civil Justice Committee and the vice chair of the Banking and Insurance Committee. There are a lot of cases in his county. I have plenty of people who've written in and who I've called back and talked to. And it's a shame because he's killing his own population, and these people actually voted him in office. Not only that, but reelected him. And so they probably are not aware of this. When asked why this law should be kept in place, according to him, what he did was he had a medical malpractice lobbyist follow me. The video is actually linked up on my website, so if you want to take a look at that that video. The lobbyist said, well, you know, if they said Florida's in this medical malpractice crisis, and doctors are leaving the state because the medical malpractice insurance is too high, and they're leaving in droves. And if this law changes, we're going to have to raise the rates. So this law was put into 1990 and in effect in 1990, and it was put in effect on the premise that they were trying to stop insurance rates from rising for doctors. And insurance rates have risen for doctors, even though this law has been in place. They also, you know, have risen in other places, and doctors have not left in droves. I don't know any doctors that have packed up their bags and said, I'm leaving Florida, the malpractice insurance is too high. I do know of a few who have decided not to carry it, and I've signed waivers with one of my doctors because they decided not to carry it. So, you know, I am aware that there is a problem with that, but this law has not made any difference whatsoever in their rising rates. It's a much better idea to vet doctors and hospitals and promote patient safety. There was a recent study. I'm actually going to publish that study, link to that study on my website coming soon. So keep an eye out for it in one of the blogs, but it was done by the University of Michigan. And they did a study about how to improve patient care. And guess what? Making a free kill law is not on their list of things to do to make patient safety a better quality. So it's really, really important that we get this repealed. I have talked to people who, excuse me, one lady, her sister went in for a fairly routine discectomy, back surgery. They nicked an artery, they closed her up, and she bled out and died. So now the process of her bleeding out and dying took 8 hours, and they were giving her blood transfusions. I have a question about that, okay? Why didn't they open her back up and find the artery that they knew was bleeding after 8 hours of giving this woman blood? That's why we call it free kill, because if they had opened that woman back up and closed off that artery and found it and fixed the problem, and she woke up alive, today they would be facing a lawsuit. So it would have been really expensive for that doctor and that hospital to make the decision to save that woman. In fact, they let her die. And, you know, nurses helplessly, you know, giving her blood and her body not being able to keep up. So these are the risks that we face with this Florida free kill law, because it's free to let you die. It's free to let you die if you are unmarried, adult, with no minor children. And believe me, your doctor knows. Does your doctor know if you're married or single? When they happen to know that? Because my doctor knows my marital status. My doctor also sees my daughter, so she knows the age of my daughter. So doctors know these things about people, and they can make decisions just like you and I on what's best for them with the information that they have in front of them. So that's really scary when you think about it, right? And I've heard of many other cases like this too, where there is a possibility where the victim could have been saved, but we don't have a right to go prove that in a court of law. Imagine that. That's unconstitutional. If I could have taken my dad's medical record to a court of law, then somebody would have been punished. Now, let me say this, just so that there's no misconception. The statute of limitations has run out. I stand to make absolutely no money. I cannot ever sue for what happened to my dad, because there's a certain law about those time periods. And I'm still here fighting for this. And there's two reasons why I keep fighting for this. One, I've heard a lot of stories of really things that will just break your heart, of mothers and fathers losing sons, of people losing sisters and brothers and parents that never ever should have died, but nobody can do anything about it. And each one breaks my heart and brings me back to my own grief. And it's tough, right? It's really tough. And I keep going for all of those people because I want to prevent this from happening. And also, selfishly, I am a free kill. I'm not married. My daughter is 26 years old, and that makes me a free kill. It also makes my daughter a free kill. She just graduated college. She's not ready to get married, and she doesn't know if she ever wants to have kids or not at this point in time. Um, so that makes her a free kill. It's not just the elderly, and not that they're any more or any less important than anyone else, but there are people of all ages dying because of this law, and it's really terrible. So that's what happened. I know I didn't provide a lot of documentation and all that, and the truth is, I really don't care if you believe me or not. It's just what's real and what's true, and I just wanted to share it with you, so that you would understand what's happening. A lot of people wonder what is happening, what is going on, why is this girl screaming about free kill all over the internet, and what exactly does that mean? Thank you. Please read information on our website. There's lots of it. There's also a letter that if you sign it, it directly goes to every senator and every House rep in the state of Florida. And some of their assistants, they tend to swap out those quite frequently. So those are hard to keep up with on the mailing list, but it does go to quite a lot of people. And we would really appreciate if you know anyone, love anyone in Florida or live in Florida, that you take a moment to sign that letter. And it'll auto send to everyone. You know, I really think that these legislators don't typically answer every email, but if they get 300, 500, or 1,000 of them, I think it makes them take notice. I'd also very much appreciate if you live in Collier County to check in with Representative Bob Rommel. He's real easy to look up, and you can get a hold of his staff very easily. Let him know your opinions on this, and if you have one. And, you know, if you believe that this law should change and you live in Collier County, he needs to be voted out, because it's going to be really hard to get it through when he's sitting at the helm of both of those committees and telling people how to vote. And, you know, having speakers come like the MedMal lobbyists just follow behind me. If I go to speak or anyone else goes to speak on this topic, we've got his guys coming behind us, and then we can't go back up there and rebut what they're saying either, because you only get your 3 minutes and that's it. My humble opinion, lobbyists shouldn't be allowed at all. That's part of what's broken in the system. And I'm not associated with any political party. I don't care what party he's associated with. I care about the cause, and I care about the people involved. And most of all, I care that I lost my dad unnecessarily right after losing my mom. And I didn't believe him when he said they were going to kill him. And for that, I have a lot of guilt. And I do wish I had taken him out of there and, you know, broken his, Baker Act to the hospital and just done what I had to do. So, this kind of helps me. It's very therapeutic for me to be helping others. So if you want to join up with us, we welcome volunteers. We need more people to speak to more legislators. We all work. This is something we all do for free. This is not a paid job. I come out of my own pocket to fly or drive to Tallahassee and stay in hotels and print flyers, and I pay for the website and all kinds of things that we all do. So, if you want to help, I can't pay for it, but I can give you plenty of work to do that can help. We have a lot of letters going out now. Some are handwritten, and those take up a lot of time. So, it might help you to feel like you're doing something too. If you want to just send an email through the website, there's a contact form there, and I'll get that. And sometimes it takes me a couple of days, but if you leave your number and you say you want to hear from me, I'll do my best to call you as soon as I can. So God bless, good night, and may you not be a free kill victim.